Good evening, guys. Hey, coming at you from St. Louis. Going to be talking about how to deal with the media tonight. Before I get into that, several people have been asking this new organization that I have, Americans for Equal Shared Parenting. I want to make sure I clarify a few things. Number one, I believe the most important organization for all of us to be following is the Father's Rights Movement. It's the largest one out there. It's got the largest reach of people. I know there's a lot of people wanting to start their own organizations, and I traditionally am against getting too many organizations started. And I know some of you think, well, then why did you start something? Mine has a very specific purpose. It's filing as a 501c4, which allows me to raise funds specifically designated for legislation, which the Father's Rights Movement is a 501c3 organization. They are allowed to do a lot more things from an educational standpoint, which is why I'm doing these Facebook Lives. I believe the Father's Rights Movement is a better resource for me to do these Facebook Lives than my Americans for Equal Shared Parenting organization. So the key is to understand what resources do we have available as a community. So TFRM is a much better reach as far as educating and reaching larger masses. One of my biggest goals is to raise some large dollar funds, and because of my political background, I believe there's a handful of people that I may be able to get to write the $10,000, $25,000, or $50,000 checks that I just think they would not write one if it was the Father's Rights Movement. I think if it was named Americans for Shared Parenting. Not that I'm in any way embarrassed to the Father's Rights Movement. I just think some of these people would be much more likely to give to something like that, especially since it's a 501c4, which specifically is targeting legislation. So I just want to clarify that. But I'm extremely proud of my association with the Father's Rights Movement. I will always be a part of it. In no way do I want my organization to detract in any way whatsoever. I think the best organizational reach we have is the Father's Rights Movement. So I just want to make sure that I clarify that. But let me get into tonight a little bit about how to deal with the media. The reason is there's a groundswelling starting to take place. The momentum is gaining. We're seeing more and more pages develop. We're seeing more and more reach on these pages, more and more views on these pages. More and more legislation is being talked about in different states. Legislators are talking about us now. We've got a seat at the table. So now the next step is to start getting some media involved. But it's very critical that we understand how we go about this. And the reason I want this is there may be some people out there that have a background in media. And so just so you know ahead of time, I'm not going to get into all the minute details, but I want to at least give some basic ideas for people that have never been involved with TV or radio interviews in particular. My specialty is not necessarily print. My specialty is more TV and radio interviews. But to give people an idea of things to be prepared for. Because if you're showing up to help with legislation at a state capitol, if you're showing up at rallies anywhere, any type of an event, there's a chance that someone from the media may seek you out for an interview. So I want to give you some ideas. Anytime you go to anything publicly, you need to be prepared because you may become the face of the community whether you like it or not. So I want to give you the 4 C's, if you will, that you need to be thinking of when you're talking to a TV or radio. Number 1 is clear. The 4 C's, just so you know, it's clear, concise, compelling, and credible. The first one is clear. You have to be very easily understandable. You've got to talk in terms that the average person can understand. Don't use language that would impress people. Don't use legal terms that are going to be over the head of some of the viewers. Don't use insider terms like rebuttable presumption. Those of us involved in the community understand what that is, but somebody who's never been involved in this organization or anything to do with us has no idea what does the term rebuttable presumption mean. So unless you take the time to explain that, it's a different story. But you also need to watch because you only have so much time that you're going to be allotted. Remember, as I said, your goal in talking to the media is you're not talking to the insiders. You're talking to the people who have never heard about our issues. Our issues will never change until people who are unaffected become just as interested as those of us who are affected. So your goal with TV and radio is to reach people that have no idea what so many of us have gone through. So as such, you need to make sure that you remember that's the audience you're talking to. Always assume that the viewers have never heard about anything that we're talking about. Use analogies. If you're trying to make it clear and understandable, you've got to use analogies. Use examples. Use sound bites. And these are things you want to be prepared on. Realize sound bites can take you so far. And if you think of some of the famous ones in history, if you go back to like political debates, I know some of you are probably too young to remember, but the famous Lloyd Benson and Dan Quayle, You know, I'm a hardcore Republican, but I got to give it to Lloyd Bentsen. He just gave a zinger that night when he said, you know, I was friends with Jack Kennedy. You, sir, are no Jack Kennedy. I mean, that was a soundbite that went around the world. And I'll hand it to Lloyd. He did a great job. But I'll also tell you what, Lloyd Bentsen knew that was coming. That was a pre-rehearsed. He knew for a fact somehow that Dan Quayle had talked in the past about comparing himself to John Kennedy. And Lloyd was waiting for the opening to use that soundbite. You need to be able to talk in sound bites that are very clear and concise. So just something as simple as, hey, I believe every child should have equal access to both parents. Just very simple, clear, concise, to the point. Make sure that you stay on topic and on message. This is one thing, once again, I think most of you know that I'm a conservative, but I've got a lot of respect for the way some people handle themselves. Some people, I don't necessarily like them as a person. A prime example is Bill Clinton. Probably polar opposite of him from a political spectrum, but I will give you this. Bill Clinton was probably one of the best interviewers that I've ever seen in my life. He was a master of staying on message, staying on topic. If you look at all of his interviews, no matter how many questions he got asked, no matter where the questions were, when he walked into that interview, he knew exactly and specifically the message he wanted to be conveyed, and he always brought the message back to exactly where he wanted it to go. You've got to plan the same thing. They may try and distract you with different questions. Realize the goal of any TV or radio interview is to get viewers. So they're not trying to be deceptive. It's just they're trying to sell. If they don't get viewers watching your interview, they're either going to not be allowed to get more interviews, they're going to get fired or something. So they're trying to create some interviews. So make sure that you stay on topic, stay on message, no matter how much they try and distract you with some of the questions they ask. Next C, the second C, is be concise. Be short and to the point. Realize this isn't a congressional testimony that you're doing. Most TV and radio interviews, you're going to have about 30 seconds or 60 seconds of coverage. Sometimes a minute and a half, and that's about it. But a very, very short period of time to totally convey what all happened that day, why they were there, and your little soundbite is about 15 seconds is all that's going to be there. So you want to make sure that you're very concise and to the point. The biggest fear the media has is that you're going to be long-winded enough that people are going to change the channel. And as a result, they're going to edit you down. You've got to make sure that you're talking in sound bites so they can't edit you down. That any sound bite that you say, boom, that's their topic they're going to be put on. Don't get into minute details. Don't start trying to talk about the 8 key points of rebuttable presumptions. The average viewer doesn't care about that, so the interview is going to edit that out anyway. So don't waste your breath trying to cover something like that. Very simple things. Don't go into a play-by-play of this happened and then this happened. Use bullet point summaries. The next thing, the third C, is to be compelling. As I said before, the goal of that TV or radio interviewer is to pull viewers in. They need a viewing audience, which raises their equity as far as a TV or radio interviewer. So you've got to be able to compel to bring people in. Once again, I use Bill Clinton as an example. A couple things Bill Clinton did very good. Number one, he always brought it back to the main point. He was also brought an emotional story. If you remember with Bill Clinton, watch some of his interviews. No matter what question they asked him, he did a magnificent job of thinking of a story that people could relate to with an emotional tie to it. He would always, and I can't give his mannerisms, I wish I could to talk about, but he would always say, I was just sitting at a kitchen table with a young woman the other day, and she told me about this situation happened to her, and it pulled people in like, oh my gosh, that poor woman. And then he would talk about how his solution would have solved the solution for that woman and so many other people. You've got to be able to do the same thing. Give a quick little emotional testimony of how kids are not allowed to be able to play ball with their dads when they come home from work. And I apologize once again, I'm not trying to be gender specific here. I realize there are a lot of women that have this issue too, so I'm not trying to single people out. But that kids look forward to seeing both their parents, and some kids don't get a chance to see one of their parents. Somehow you've got to tie that emotional aspect of, what about the kid who comes home and everybody else is playing with ball with their dad, but their dad's not around. They only get to see him every other weekend. Use the kitchen table theory. You always have to try and figure out, how will this affect the average American at a kitchen table? So try and keep that in mind when you're talking to them. As I said, use personal testimonials, use analogies, use stories that people can relate to. And then the fourth C is to be credible. You've got to build a relationship with these reporters. Your goal is not just this report. That's what some people don't understand. They get all excited because they realize, oh my gosh, I'm going to be on TV, I'm going to be on the radio, I'm going to get our issue covered. This is going to be great. Realize the goal of every interview is to plant the seed so you get another interview and another interview and another interview. You want the relationship. You don't want 15 minutes of fame. You want a relationship that our issue can be out in the forefront. So a couple things you want to do. Number one, undersell and overproduce. Don't call a TV station and tell them you're going to have 500 people show up at an event if you know you're only going to have about 8 or 10. You've blown your credibility. You've won the battle, but you've lost the war. They may show up, but two things. Number one, they probably won't cover your event. Number two, they may cover it with a negative slant of, wow, these people, they thought they were going to make a difference, and look at how pathetic the showing was. It may work against you. Or number three, they may just never show up at any event that you ever do. So make sure that you don't try and oversell things. Next point goes along with that of use discretion when you're asking for coverage. I know there's some cities that try and have events, say, every month. Don't call for a TV or a radio interview every single month. You're wearing out your welcome. You're better off having one big event that you get a lot of coverage at than 5 small events. So if you can, try and figure out one big event, especially if you can get a legislator to show up. That's where the media likes to cover things. If you can say, hey, state senator so-and-so showing up or state reps showing up, now all of a sudden now you've got their attention. Now they want to show up because they don't want to miss your event. So if you do something like that, but like I said, watch how often you call them. If you're during the legislative session, don't call them at every stage of the bill for the House hearing and the Senate hearing, and then when it goes to the House floor and when it goes to the Senate floor. Pick 1 or 2 times during a legislative session and power pack that's when you want the coverage. Help them and they're going to help you. If you can, try and figure out ahead of time. If you've got a TV interview, you want to make sure that you set up, if you're an outside venue, set up so that the sun is shining towards your face. It may not sound like a big deal, but to a TV personality, that is a big deal. Because if the sun is behind you, your face is going to be blackened out. That does not make a good interview for TV at all. So help them and they're going to help you. Make sure that you plan the angle shots, plan the lighting, plan where the banners are going to be set up. So if they can come in and let them know that you've planned it that way. That really scores a lot of points with an interviewer when they realize you've taken the time to help them out with some of these angles. Have resources available. In Missouri, we're very fortunate. We've got people like a Jeremy Roberts and Linda Reutzel and Kenneth Goins and Scott Smith. These guys are dynamite. And ideally you want someone like that too. Normally you want somebody like me that's kind of a PR type of a person, but for the details, you want to immediately hand off to one of the other people. But if you don't, you want to make sure that those people are at least accessible with their phone numbers too. So that if the interviewer has questions, when they go back to the station and they're starting to edit and splice things together, and they have a question of exactly and specifically what did this bill do, you want to have somebody like a Jeremy that they know their phone number and can call them up to ask the details to make sure that they're giving accurate information when they get on air. So it's very critical that whoever the main person is, and I'm talking from a legislative standpoint, but if you're getting some legislation passed, whoever the driver is of that legislation, you want the reporter knowing the phone number of that individual so that before things go on air, they can call with any edits or any clarifications that they have. Let's see, as far as interviews, fewer is better. You're better off having about 2 people. What you want is one person that can talk more from a personal standpoint, that kitchen table, the emotional, the relatable, the analogies, and then one facts, figures, details type person. The 2 of those seem to work very, very well. You don't want to have 8 different people being interviewed. It gets too congested for TV or radio. Ideally, you need 2. Sometimes you can get by with 3 or 4, but more than that, normally they're going to edit and splice too much. Make sure that you dress appropriately to fit the situation. If you're in a state legislature, you might want to wear a coat and tie. If you're out at a rally, you may not want to be dressed like this. Watch the language. Don't slip and use an F-bomb or something if you're going to be on TV, because that can spin and look... Sorry about that. I got interrupted there. Hopefully I'm still going. I don't know if I am. Can somebody send me a message if I'm still going here? I'm guessing that I am. So I'm going to keep on going. But let's see. Okay, along with being credible, never lose your cool. So if they're asking you questions that you're not or that you feel are very intimidating questions, you can't lose your cool. Once again, they want a story. And if you're not giving the right story, they're going to create it. And so the story is either going to be what they showed up for or you, one of the two. So never lose your cool. That is going to be taken out of context, and that's going to be shown on the news. Always thank reporters for covering the issue. Always, always, always. Both in person, and I would send them either an email or an actual thank you card when you get home or later on that night. Now, a couple final tips as we wrap up. Realize that, sort of a recap, if your story is not clear, concise, and compelling, you're going to be the story. We don't want that. We want the story to be our issue. Number 2, as I mentioned, never lose your cool. Always, always, always remain calm, no matter how antagonistic. Some reporters, that's the way, their method. They try to antagonize people to get under their skin because that becomes the story. Number 3, be prepared for questions. Do your homework. Expect to be challenged and have an answer ready. The second last thing is editing, editing, editing. If you're not concise, they're going to edit out. So you've got to make sure that you're concise enough that they won't have a chance to edit too much. And the last thing is remember sound bites. You've got to have sound bites prepared. So hopefully that helps everybody. Like I said, you never know when the microphone's going to be shoved in your face, but we can educate a lot of people. I think most of you know I am developing that database at afesp.com, which stands for Americans for Equal Shared Parenting. It's a database that we're going to be using as we try and get legislation passed across the country over the next year. If you haven't subscribed to that, there's a little thing. And as I said, this isn't an organization where I'm going to try and round up a lot of people. We've got plenty of organizations for that. This is very specifically designed to help get legislation passed. So if you're interested in keeping up with what legislation is going on in different states, and if you're willing to help out with some calls to action as far as sending an email to a legislator, writing a legislator, please do me a favor. Go to afesp.com, and there's a thing that'll say subscribe. Right above that, there's a little flag. Sort of click where the flag is. All I need to know is your email address, your city, your state, basic things like that. It'll take you literally 2 minutes on and off. But we need to develop a database that we can really start getting effective, especially if you're in certain states. If you're in the state of Missouri, we need your help. I believe next year is going to be the year in Missouri, but we need a large database. If you're in Missouri, I need you right now to log on to efesp.com and enter your information. If you're in Illinois, I'll tell you what, Chad and Corey are getting a groundswell going in Illinois. We need your information in Illinois. Iowa, I think, is definitely in play, especially with all the stuff that's going on with the oversight committee this week up in Iowa. And I know Nicholas is real involved in that. But we need your information in Iowa, Texas for sure, Alabama. So make sure that you send in your information. But anyways, as I said, I hope this information was helpful tonight. My goal, as I said, has always been to make sure that we educate and empower other people. I'm very grateful that I had some education and some background in this area. But what we need is not one Mark Ludwig out there, not even a handful. We need thousands of people that you guys are the ones that make it happen. So anytime I can ever help, please send me a private message. I'm willing to help out in any way I can. But tell you what, guys, we are making a difference, and things are going to be changing in a big way. So thanks again to everybody. I appreciate you.